Welcome back, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on a tribute to His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha. Dear friends, we are picking back up on Hassan Baliuzi's immortal work, Abdu'l-Baha, the Center of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah. Dear friends, we are on Chapter 20, Return to Europe. Abdu'l-Baha's second visit to Paris, which lasted several weeks, assumed certain characteristics of its own. He had few public engagements, but numbers of Baha'is had arrived from the East for the specific purpose of attaining his presence, such as the aforementioned Haji Amin, Mirza Azizullah Khan Varga, the elder son of the martyr Varga, Sayyid Ahmad Baghraf, Mirza Agha Khan Qaim Maqami, and Mirza Ali Akbar Rafsanjani. The last named was sent by Abdu'l-Baha to Switzerland, then to London and Stuttgart to teach the faith. And so to them, Abdu'l-Baha gave much of his time. A photograph taken with him under the arches of the Eiffel Tower shows that their number was not small. Moreover, vicissitudes of fortune had brought to Paris a multitude of émigrés from Iran and the Ottoman Empire. These men were from the ranks both of the reactionaries, supporters of the old regime, and of liberals and constitutionalists. Many of them sought Abdu'l-Baha and requested to meet him. To them, too, he gave of his time impartially. And there were some among the nobility of Iran, such as Muayyirul Mamalik, Intizamul Sultane, and Mirza Mehdi Khan Ghaffari, who were unreservedly devoted to Abdu'l-Baha and attended him most of the time. The Baha'i community of Paris had fewer French than Americans, English, and Persians. Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney was in constant attendance upon Abdu'l-Baha, as was M. Bernard, who was killed in the first weeks of the Great War. Because of illness, Abdu'l-Baha's movements were perforce restricted for a time, and he prolonged his stay in Paris. His drawing room, however, was always thronged with visitors, as it had been in London, New York, Washington, and San Francisco. Abdu'l-Baha's Paris home was an apartment at 30 Rue Saint-Didier, which Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney had rented for him. In his drawing room during those weeks in Paris, Abdu'l-Baha related many incidents and stories of earlier years in Iran, in Baghdad, in Edirne, in Akka. He spoke on more than one occasion of the great Iranian statesman Qaim Maqam Farahani, Grand Vizier to Muhammad Shah. Had he not been put to death, Abdu'l-Baha said, Iran would not have been ruined. Moreover, had his countrymen given ear at a later time to divine counsel, ancient glory would not have departed. On January 26, Abdu'l-Baha cabled to Agha Muhammad Taghi Isfahani, a well-known Baha'i of Cairo, to instruct that everything should be done for the comfort of Mirza Abul Fazl, who he said was as his own self. News had reached him of Mirza Abul Fazl's failing health and powers. Haji Amin, who was the trustee of the Huruq, had brought £700 to present to Abdu'l-Baha. In a humorous mood, Abdu'l-Baha said that the Haji had brought £700, but had already obtained £1,000 from him for this and that. Zarqani comments that one indeed marveled at the way Abdu'l-Baha administered his finances. He spent freely to uphold the dignity of the faith, and gave generously to relieve distress and poverty and to aid the sick. But he himself did not possess a good winter coat. His attendants had to beg again and again to obtain his permission to order a new coat to be made for him. The Persian minister in Paris, Abdus-Samad Khan, the Mumtaza Sultaneh, called on Abdu'l-Baha a week after his arrival. A number of noted Easterners were also present, who were united in saying that they felt very much at home in the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. There was a samovar in the drawing room, and tea was served in Persian fashion. Abdu'l-Baha gave them an insight into the history of Islam and of Iran, telling them of events rarely recorded. That evening, January 27th, he returned the minister's call. Abdu'l-Baha was not sleeping well, and occasionally fever troubled him, but his engagements continued. Ahmad Pasha and Munir Pasha, prominent Ottomans of the old regime, together with their dependents, called on January 28th, as did a number of Persian notabilities. Abdu'l-Baha told the latter that although the independence of Iran had been bartered away, there was no cause for despair. Iran would progress. Her future was bright. He had spoken earlier of the dismal materialism overshadowing Paris, and he did so again the next day. In London, he had felt happier because there was greater scope to disseminate the faith. Abdu'l-Baha wanted the Baha'is, who had come from the East to visit him, to have their meals daily in his Paris home. In the afternoon of January 29th, as Abdu'l-Baha came from his room to the drawing room and asked for tea, a visitor was announced whose presence there was most astonishing. This was Rashid Pasha, an ex-Wali of Beirut, whose overbearing attitude and hostility towards Abdu'l-Baha in the closing stages of his renewed incarceration within Akka were notorious. Abdu'l-Baha received him very kindly in his own room. Rashid Pasha was now reverential and contrite, and Baha'is present could not but look with great wonderment at what they were witnessing. With prompt courtesy, Abdu'l-Baha returned Rashid Pasha's call that very evening. When he came home that night, he related many incidents of the times when their afternoon visitor had held Syria in his grasp. In those days, Rashid Pasha had been after money from Abdu'l-Baha and had sent his son to Akka, But Abdu'l-Baha had paid scant attention to veiled hints. Then Rashid Pasha himself came to Haifa, and although by official decree Abdu'l-Baha was confined to the limits of the city walls, the Vali arranged with the governor of Akka for Abdu'l-Baha to see him in Haifa. Again, Abdu'l-Baha ignored all hints and allusions. As it happened, said Abdu'l-Baha, the day we went to Haifa, the governor lost a valuable ring on the way. He told me of his loss on the return journey, and I assured him that he need not worry, as it would be found. When we reached Akka, I alighted by the goldsmith's shop, informed the goldsmith that a ring would be brought to him, and that he should bring it to me. Then I re-entered the carriage and went home with the governor. The following morning the goldsmith brought me the very ring. I took it to the governor, who was amazed. He told Rashid Pasha that Abbas Effendi knew Mu'allan Ali's system of divination and had found his lost ring. Therefore he should be left alone, for he was freely stating that should the whole world assemble and try to get him out of prison before the appointed time, they would find it an impossible task. But at the hour of liberation, if all the monarchs of the world should unite, they would fail to deny him his liberty. Since Rashid Pasha had complete confidence in the governor, he did for some time restrain his greed and halt his aggression. A number of Iranian students visited Abdu'l-Baha on January 31st. He spoke to them about agriculture and industry and commerce and told them that Iran needed iron smelting plants because industry and agriculture alike depended on foundries. In the evening of that day, a meeting was held at the home of Monsieur and Madame Dreyfus Barney. These weekly meetings of the Baha'is, to which seekers and inquirers came as well, were a regular feature of the life of the Paris community. Other homes, Monsieur and Madame Scott's and Miss Edith Sanderson's, were also venues for these gatherings, which Abdu'l-Baha addressed from time to time. One day, Abdu'l-Baha quoted a Persian verse that eating was for the purpose of living and not the other way round. He also said that most Europeans were now acting as though man were made for work and not work for man. Another day, after inspecting a children's home which was poorly supplied, he spoke of the many magnificent buildings kept solely for entertainment, while the poor were abandoned to such misery and wretchedness. By the beginning of February, Riyad Salim Effendi and Dr. Saleh, Baha'is of Egypt, had arrived, enlarging the ranks of visiting Baha'is. In the afternoon of February 6, escorted by Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney, Abdu'l-Baha visited Versailles, and in the evening, Professor Inayatollah Khan, an Indian who had called several times and asked to be permitted to present his art, sang and played his musical instrument. Afterwards, Abdu'l-Baha spoke about music and the celebrated Eastern musicians of bygone days. The strain on his health was now beginning to show. He was constantly seeing people and conversing with them. He said that his letters had been left unanswered. Once I could get up at night and write, but I cannot do so now. On the evening of February 12th, Abdu'l-Baha was the guest of the Esperantists. Despite his increasing weakness, he went to that banquet at Hotel Moderne and delivered an address, and the next evening he addressed the Theosophists. On February 17th, he spoke at 3 meetings in the homes of Baha'is. That night, he visited Pasteur Monet's theological seminary and answered his questions. A statement he made 2 days later is of particular significance in the light of recent developments. He had been speaking of the great technological and scientific strides of the age. It would be meet, he said, if ways and means of reaching other planets were now devised. 2 Persians who detested each other came to call on him on February 19th. As they arrived at the same time, there was no turning back for either. But when they left, they were happy and reconciled. A number of Persian students also called, some of whom were Baha'is. They were in Paris on government scholarships. As it was a Sunday, Abdu'l-Baha asked them to spend the day there and expressed his hope that in the future they would contribute to the prosperity and well-being of Iran. Study those sciences, he said, that will benefit the nation. Some of them did rise to prominent positions in later years. One of these Persian visitors, who had been several times to 30 Rue Saint Didier, told how he had been severely taken to task by a fanatical compatriot and had written a long letter in reply. Zarghani quotes part of that letter. And thirdly, animals are tamed by kindness and affection. Woe unto the man who would fall short of an animal. Fourthly, how can I fail to prize a person whom thousands have praised? Fifthly, if this revered being had no greatness in him, then by what power has he established his authority among so many and captured the devotion of all these souls? Sixthly, the fact remains that of all the 15 million Persians, it is this high-minded man alone who, in an age such as this, has received such acclaim wherever he has gone, even given that, as you say, he is not entitled to the rank and station attributed to him. What doubt can there be about his other attainments? He brings glory to Iran and to the Orient. At the conclusion of the morning meeting on February 20th, Horace Hawley's young child ran up to Abdu'l-Baha. He picked the child up with great tenderness and spoke of Hussein, his own son, who had died in childhood. Hussein used to creep into his bed while he was asleep, and Abdu'l-Baha said it was wonderful. On February 21st, Abdu'l-Baha gave a discourse at the Salle de Troyes. The meeting was arranged by Lyon's spiritualist. Madame Jeanne Beauchamp recalled Abdu'l-Baha's previous visit in 1911 and expressed their joy to welcome him again. By the 26th, Abdu'l-Baha had succumbed to a severe cold, and the next day he could hardly speak. Yet he received visitors as he lay in bed. In the meantime, the Baha'is of Germany had been pleading for Abdu'l-Baha to visit their country, and on February 12th a letter had come from Budapest from Mr. and Mrs. Stark, inviting him to visit Hungary. During the first week of March, a number of Baha'is arrived from Germany, among them Miss Alma Knobloch, their pioneer teacher. They once again begged for the bounty of receiving him, but Abdu'l-Baha's health was still precarious, and his physical weakness precluded a long journey for the time being. Whenever he could, he would go out to return the visits of notables such as the Iranian minister in Paris and Munir Pasha. But his speaking at meetings, either in his own drawing room or at the homes of the Baha'is of Paris, had to be halted. Professor and Mrs. Edward Brown called on March 9th. Abdu'l-Baha talked with Edward Brown for more than an hour. He was very tired that evening and spoke of hastening to the Holy Land. Abdu'l-Baha moved from his apartment to a hotel in Rue Lauriston, near Place de l'Étoile, on March 19th, and there he celebrated the festival of Nowruz on the 21st. He had a number of guests for luncheon that day. Many of the Eastern notabilities who called on Nowruz were much surprised to find themselves in his presence in each other's company. Only a few years earlier they would never have thought it possible. Later in the day, Abdu'l-Baha, accompanied by Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney, went to the Iranian legation where he gave an address, and he spoke again that evening in the home of the Dreyfus Barneys. At last, Abdu'l-Baha was well enough to travel. On March 30th to Stuttgart, his attendants were Sayyid Ahmadi Bagharov, Mirza Mahmud Zarqani, Sayyid Asadullah, and Mirza Ahmad Sohrab. Abdu'l-Baha told them to change completely from Eastern garb to European dress, and to discard their Oriental headgear. Baha'is of Stuttgart had not been informed of his departure from Paris, because he wished to arrive unannounced. German Baha'is had been told previously not to attempt to obtain any newspaper publicity for his visit to their country. He reached Stuttgart early in the evening of April 1st and took rooms in Hotel Marquardt nearby the station, which was the best in the town. Then he let his attendants telephone to some of the Baha'is and inform them of his arrival. Much surprised, these Baha'is hurried to his hotel. Abdu'l-Baha explained that he had wanted his arrival to be a complete surprise. He loved the Baha'is of Stuttgart, he said, and had spoken often of the sterling qualities of German Baha'is, of their sincerity and steadfastness. Therefore the faith would gain great strength in their midst. Baha'is streamed into the hotel the next morning. It was planned that Abdu'l-Baha would meet them at his hotel in the mornings, and at other times he would go out to meetings at their homes or elsewhere. That evening, as Abdu'l-Baha's car drew up before the house where a meeting had been arranged, the cry of Ya Baha'u'llah went up from a large number gathered outside. The next day, Abdu'l-Baha remarked that the hotelier might leave his hotel and seek refuge elsewhere because of such numbers pouring in. Indeed, the staff of the hotel were shaken and astonished to see so many of their countrymen pay such attention and respect to an Easterner who, as it seemed, had come from nowhere. One of the Baha'is asked Abdu'l-Baha what to say when people inquired who he was. "Tell them," he said, "that he was a person calling men to the kingdom of God, a promoter of the faith of Baha'u'llah, a herald of peace and reconciliation, and an advocate of the oneness of humanity." A clergyman of Stuttgart had been greatly impressed by some answered questions, and requested Abdu'l-Baha's permission to translate the book into German. This permission was given to him, but to his next request to be permitted to communicate these teachings to the Kaiser, Abdu'l-Baha replied that it was not advisable because the emperor was proud and would not deign to listen. In the evening of April 3rd, Abdu'l-Baha addressed a large audience in the upper hall of the city Burger Museum. Sohrab's English translation of Abdu'l-Baha's talk was, in turn, rendered into German by Herr Eckstein. Abdu'l-Baha said, "I came from a distant land. I have traveled 20,000 miles until I came to you in Stuttgart. 40 years I was a prisoner. I was young when I was put into prison, and my hair was white when the prison doors opened. After all these long years of the sufferings of prison life, I willingly took upon myself all the hardships of a long journey. Now I am here in order to be united with you, in order to meet you. My purpose is that perchance you may illumine the world of humanity, that all men may unite in perfect love and friendship, that religious prejudices, national prejudices, race distinctions, all may be completely abandoned. The religions of today consist of dogmas. Because these dogmas differ from each other, discord and even hatred is manifest. Religion must be the basis of all good fellowship. Think of the turmoil that today exists in the Balkans. How much blood is shed? How many thousands of mothers have lost their sons? How many children have become orphans, and how many buildings, villages, and cities have been destroyed? The Balkan states have become a volcano. All this sin originates from the prejudices created by the different dogmas called forth by superstitions and race prejudices. The essence of the religion of God is love, and the holy books bear testimony to that. For the essence of the religion of God is the light of the world of humanity. But mankind today has forgotten what constitutes true religion. Each nation and each people today hold to some definite dogma. These traditions and these dogmas are like the husks surrounding the kernel. We must release the kernel from the husk. The world of humanity is in the dark. Our aim is to illumine mankind. It is our hope that this darkness may be dispelled and that the rays of the sun of reality will shine again. This century is the century of light. This period is the period of science. This cycle is the cycle of reality. This age is the age of progress and freedom of thought. This day is the greatest day of the Lord. This time is the time in which all is resurrected into new life. Therefore, I desire that all may be united in harmony. Strive and work so that the standard of the world of human oneness may be raised among men, so that the lights of universal peace may shine and the East and the West embrace, and the material world become a mirror of the kingdom of God, that eternal light may shine forth, and that the day may break which will not be followed by night. Abdu'l-Baha's visit to Esslingen was particularly moving and impressive. Anna Westlin had organized a meeting which was more like a festival on behalf of the children whom she taught. Alma Knobloch wrote to her sister Pauline, Mrs. Joseph Hannen, in America. We have had some wonderful meetings. The one in Esslingen surpassed them all. It was the children's meeting last Friday, April 4th, 1913, in the afternoon. They had secured a very pretty hall, which was most beautifully decorated with greens, plants, and flowers, with large and small tables near the walls and round tables in the center. About 50 children and 80 adults were present. In a smaller room adjoining the hall, the children had been assembling, holding flowers in their hands, forming two lines for Abdu'l-Baha to pass through. It looked most beautiful as Abdu'l-Baha came upstairs. He passed through a short hall and looked so pleased and delighted to see the dear children. The children presented their flowers to Abdu'l-Baha, and he gave them boxes of chocolates and sweets. Later he spoke to them all, children and adults, young and old, and the photograph was taken outside the hall. Abdu'l-Baha seated in their midst. The following day at his hotel he spoke with great joy of the previous day's gathering at Esslingen. On April 5th, Abdu'l-Baha spoke at a number of meetings. In the evening he addressed the Esperanto Society, whose president, Professor Christaller, offered him a warm welcome. The day ended with dinner at the home of Herr Eckstein. Other Baha'is whose homes Abdu'l-Baha visited, where meetings were held, included Consul and Frau Schwartz, Herr and Frau Schweizer, and Herr and Frau Hergel. The Schweizers lived in the town of Zuffenhausen. The first meeting of the day on Sunday, April 6th, was at the Hotel Marquardt. So many were there, and so many tarried behind. Once the meeting was over, that Abdu'l-Baha teased them, saying that they would be forcing the owner of the hotel to run away. In the afternoon, Abdu'l-Baha was driven in the Black Forest. Baha'is had gathered at the park in Wagenburg. As there were too many to photograph together, several group photographs were taken with Abdu'l-Baha in the center of each. In the evening, there was a public meeting at the Aubert Museum, and once more the attendance was high. Abdu'l-Baha and his attendants had dinner that night at the home which Miss Knobloch shared with Fräulein Doring. Abdu'l-Baha intended to leave for Budapest on April 7th, but was persuaded by Consul Schwartz to visit Bad Mergentheim, approximately 60 miles distant from Stuttgart, where the consul owned the hotel and the mineral bath. Abdu'l-Baha said at Bad Mergentheim that since he had left Persia, he had never until then heard so many nightingales singing in such beautiful surroundings. However, he would not stay more than one night. For years, a monument to commemorate Abdu'l-Baha's visit, consisting of a metal plaque of his profile mounted on stone, stood in parkland in Bad Mergentheim. It was removed when the Nazis came to power. As far as can be ascertained, it was melted down. Abdu'l-Baha returned to Stuttgart the next day and had luncheon at the home of Consul and Frau Schwartz. All day the Baha'is streamed in to visit him, until his train left for Budapest at 8 p.m. Wilhelm Hergel joined his retinue for this journey to act as translator. Next morning, April 9th, trains had to be changed in Vienna. A number of Iranian Baha'is awaited Abdu'l-Baha's arrival at the station. Since trains for Budapest set out from another station, they had some minutes with him. Prior to Abdu'l-Baha's visit to Budapest, no one had taught the faith of Baha'u'llah in the capital of Hungary, so there were no Baha'is in Budapest to meet him at the station. Mr. and Mrs. Stark and a few others who had invited Abdu'l-Baha to visit their city had mistakenly gone to the wrong station to greet him. But they knew that he was to stay at the Hotel Ritz. There they offered him their welcome, and Abdu'l-Baha made reply. I hope that we shall all be confirmed to serve the world of humanity, because no service is greater today than promoting the oneness of mankind and international peace, so that people may be freed from the bonds of ancient prejudices and harmful imitations, cleansed of religious, national, racial, political, and patriotic prejudices. As long as these prejudices remain, felicity and ease will not be fully revealed in the world of man. At a time when the East was enveloped and thickly beset by the gloom and darkness of such prejudices, Baha'u'llah appeared like the sun upon the horizon. He declared the oneness of the world of humanity. He said that all peoples constitute one mankind, are servants of one God, descended from the same ancestry. They are the flock of one God, and He is their real shepherd. He loves His flock, and all are dear to Him. While He is kind to all, loves all, and feeds and protects all, why should we be unkind one to the other? Why should we engage in warfare? Reporters apprised of Abdu'l-Baha's arrival hurried to interview him. Photographs of him outside the hotel appeared in their papers. A man who saw Abdu'l-Baha walking by the riverside recognized him by his photograph and approached to ask the favor of his autograph on the margin of the newspaper. In the morning of April 10th, a number of well-known academics, among whom where Arabs and Turks called on him. They included Dr. Agnes Gusen, the rector of the university, Professor Julius Germanus, and Dr. Alexander Gishwin, a member of parliament. Sirdar Omra Singh of Punjab was another visitor. The Sirdar spoke of Professor Arminius Vanbury, who greatly desired to meet Abdu'l-Baha, but was too ill to leave his house. Abdu'l-Baha promised to go himself to visit him. That evening, Abdu'l-Baha addressed the Theosophical Society. The next day he received a deputation from the Turkish Association. These were young men come to present with an address of welcome. Inviting them to be seated, Abdu'l-Baha spoke to them. His great hope, he said, was to see the East and the West reconciled. To bring that about would be a great service to mankind. But in truth, there was no East nor West. The whole earth was one. Any point on it was east of another and west of yet another. All these points constituted one globe, one homeland, and mankind was one family. He was very glad to see an association that worked for the progress of Easterners and their friendship with the people of the West, and he wished them all success, all confirmation. During the afternoon of April 11th, Abdu'l-Baha returned the visits of Professor Ignaz Goldziher and other notabilities and engaged in long conversations with them. When he arrived at the hall of the old building of Parliament for the public meeting, he was very fatigued, barely able to speak. Yet he delivered a powerful discourse, and the audience, which had in it a number of the prominent men and academics of Budapest, showed that it had greatly appreciated the talk. The next morning, April 12th, Abdu'l-Baha's visitors included the president of the Turanian Society. Abdu'l-Baha spoke of the need for that supernatural power which, transcending all human limitations of racialism and nationalism, and overcoming all forces of materialism, could and would bring and bind together men all over the world. In the afternoon he went, as he had promised, to visit Arminius Vanbury. This learned Orientalist was one of the most colorful figures of the 19th century, of the same mold as Sir Richard Burton. As Burton had daringly made the pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina under the name of Mirza Abdullah Shirazi, a devout Persian, and passed unnoticed, so Arminius Vanbury had traveled to Bukhara as Rashid Effendi, a genuine Osmanli, an Ottoman. It was no less risky and perilous an undertaking, since the emirs of Bukhara had no hesitation in beheading indiscreet infidels, to which the fate of two brave British officers, Colonel C. Stoddart and Captain Arthur Connolly, amply testified. Vanbury had changed national garbs as well as religious affiliations several times. Born in 1832, he was now in his 82nd year and had only a few more months to live. He died on September 15th. That was very first encounter of Abdu'l-Baha completely captivated him, as the letter he wrote bears out. The next day, despite his illness and infirmity and the bitterly cold weather, he betook himself to Abdu'l-Baha's hotel to meet him once again. But Abdu'l-Baha had gone to the studio of Professor Robert A. Nadler, a well-known portrait painter, for a sitting. Banbury waited for a long while until his weak condition forced him to return home. Before he departed, he told Abdu'l-Baha's attendants of the intense devotion evoked in him. That same afternoon, Abdu'l-Baha visited Sardar Umra Singh. The Sardar too was greatly devoted to the person of Abdu'l-Baha. Though a blizzard was raging, a good many people came to Abdu'l-Baha's hotel that evening of April 13th and stayed till late, listening to his address. Indeed, the weather was proving very inclement, and snowfalls were frequent. The next morning, Abdu'l-Baha was preparing to leave for Vienna, when the president of the Turanian Society was announced. He requested Abdu'l-Baha to delay his departure because they had planned another meeting for him and had widely advertised it. Abdu'l-Baha acceded to this request. He then returned the call of the Ottoman Consul General and visited Arminius Banbury, who was overjoyed. In the evening, he addressed the meeting organized by the Turanian Society at the hall of the old building of Parliament, then a museum. The gathering was large and truly appreciative. Ali Abbas Agha, a Tabrizi carpet merchant, had during that week become so attached to Abdu'l-Baha that he gave a dinner party for him at his own home on the same evening of April 14th. The Ottoman Consul General was among the guests. On April 15th, Abdu'l-Baha had symptoms of a severe cold, and he could not travel to Vienna until the 19th. Mr. and Mrs. Stark and Sardar Umra Singh attended him most of the time. He assured them of success in days to come, should they be firm and steadfast. Abdu'l-Baha reached Vienna in the evening of April 19th and took residence in the Grand Hotel. The aftermath of his severe cold and the vagaries of the weather still troubled him. The Turkish ambassador in Vienna had asked his consul general in Budapest to inform him of the date of Abdu'l-Baha's arrival. Abdu'l-Baha decided to pay him the first visit. The ambassador, although a man exceedingly fanatical, was so impressed by this visit that he insisted on keeping Abdu'l-Baha for luncheon. When Abdu'l-Baha returned to his hotel, Frau Tyler and Herr Kruz, two theosophists who had been at the station the previous night to greet him, called to convey the greetings of other theosophists and to express their eager desire to hear his discourse that evening. After they had gone, Abdu'l-Baha went out for a walk. As it happened, a collection was being made for charity. Whenever Abdu'l-Baha met the collectors, he gave them money. In the park, children were playing, and to them too he gave money. Whatever he and his attendants had in their pockets was given away, and he said, laughing, that the people had made them penniless that day. When he went to the Theosophical Hall, he had to walk up 120 steps because the building was new and no lift had yet been installed. The next day, April 20th, a number of theosophists called on him at the hotel. In the afternoon and evening, Abdu'l-Baha was the guest of the Persian minister and the Turkish ambassador respectively. On April 21st, the Persian minister called in the morning. Later in the day, Abdu'l-Baha went for a drive, and in the evening he once again addressed the members of the Theosophical Society. Some Iranian residents of Vienna visited him on the 23rd. To them he spoke at length of the sad conditions in their country. The Theosophists heard him for a third time that evening. Before Abdu'l-Baha left Vienna, Frau Tyler called to express her newly found devotion, and he also received, among others, Baroness von Suttner, a well-known worker for the cause of peace. On April 24th, he traveled back to Stuttgart, where he arrived in the early hours of the following morning. Abdu'l-Baha stayed once again in the Hotel Marquardt. During this second visit to Stuttgart, which also lasted a week, he was mostly unwell. The cold contracted in Budapest had persisted and was now affecting his chest. The Baha'is of Stuttgart had arranged and advertised a meeting for the evening of the 25th at the Burger Museum. In the afternoon, the condition of his chest worsened, causing great concern. Physicians told him that he should not go out and should use his voice as little as possible. His attendants, whom he had sent on to the meeting, felt that the large and eager assemblage there would be disappointed and dismayed should they be deprived of meeting Abdu'l-Baha. They returned to the hotel with a plan which they thought would both safeguard Abdu'l-Baha's health and make it possible for the people to meet him. A saloon car, well protected from the elements, would take Abdu'l-Baha to the museum where, in a room apart from the main hall, people could be allowed into his presence. As soon as they presented this plan to Abdu'l-Baha and told him of the eagerness and disappointment of the audience, he arose. Physicians had made him stay indoors, he said, but his health was for the purpose of serving the faith. While Wilhelm Hergel was giving a talk in his stead, he walked into the hall, to the utmost delight and surprise of the audience, and using his full voice delivered a discourse on the need of world peace and the power that can guarantee it. The talk over, Abdu'l-Baha was about to leave and return quickly to his hotel when a voice was heard wailing. He stopped and asked his attendants to make inquiries. It was found that a lady who had tried to reach Abdu'l-Baha and had been kept back by the press of the crowd was weeping. Abdu'l-Baha stayed to speak to her words of great kindness. The next day, to questions about his health, he answered that the previous night's venture, although considered very risky, had proved the right medicine for him. The war in the Balkans was mentioned in conversation that day. Abdu'l-Baha advised the Baha'is to talk of their own war against materialism and ignorance. The Balkan War led to death, their war to life. That war led to disaster, their war always to glory and victory. Christ waged this war on the cross and triumphed over all. A man from Switzerland was among his visitors. To him he said that his stay in Switzerland had been too short, and he had not met many people there, but he could feel that they were people of great capabilities, and when the cause reached them, it would find devoted advocates. On April 27th, a number of children were brought to the hotel. The sight of children always gave Abdu'l-Baha great joy. He said that he particularly loved children because they were nearer to the kingdom of God. Later, the parents of one child told him how, when asked to pray for the master's health, the child had replied that he would go away if he recovered. We don't want him to go away. Abdu'l-Baha was greatly touched. Although he had felt better and had gone out of doors and to meetings as well, physicians warned him on April 29th not to attend meetings or tax his voice. Should he follow their advice, he would be able to travel to Paris within 3 days. On the morning of May 1st, Abdu'l-Baha met the Baha'is of Stuttgart in groups. He spoke very tenderly to them. To one group he said that he wished to converse with them, but his chest was not helpful. He would always anticipate their good news. To another he spoke of the 2 ways in which people say farewell. For some, memories gradually fade away, out of sight, out of mind. But others keep their memories ever afresh. There were Baha'is whom he had not seen for years. He was in Europe. They were in Persia, but they were always in his mind and close to him. To a third group he said that although his time in Stuttgart was limited, he hoped that the harvest would prove limitless. Then he left for Paris. That morning he had been speaking to Baha'is at his hotel all the while, assuring them of his love and admiration. On this third visit to Paris, Abdu'l-Baha resided at Hotel California, probably either in Avenue Kléber or Rue Colbert. His physical strength had suffered greatly, and he was unable on several occasions to go to the meetings held in the homes of the Baha'is. But he was always receiving visitors at the hotel, giving a talk whenever they gathered in numbers. He also kept, as far as possible, his daily habit of a walk out of doors. One day, although he had guests for luncheon, he found it impossible to sit much longer at the table and had to go to his room to rest. Another day he was heard calling Sayyid Asadullah and telling that faithful attendant in jest to fear God and bring him a cup of coffee, for he was feeling weak and the hotel food did not suit him. On May 8th, at the conclusion of the morning meeting in the hotel, he said, "The Blessed Perfection has trained me to shoulder the burdens of others, not to put mine on others' shoulders." 2 days later he spoke of the covenant, that its purpose was to safeguard the strength and the power of the cause. Without it, the circle of Baha'is would have broken up completely. Some people have imagined, he said, that the Blessed Perfection has taken relations between father and son into account. They do not know that he has instituted the power of the covenant for the propagation of the cause of God and for the victory of his word. A lady offered him 500 francs, which he declined to accept, but because she pleaded very hard, he advised, let it be sent to Dr. Moody for the Tarbiyat school in Tehran. Letters came pouring in. Abdu'l-Baha said that he read them, but could not answer them all, as there was no time. Some people seemed to think that he corresponded only with them and so kept writing, whereas he had to correspond with people all over the world. One day in Egypt, suffering from high fever, he was handed a long letter which he read to the end. He then commented that a long sheet had been covered with very small handwriting, and ill as he was, he had read every word of it, only to find that the letter had nothing noteworthy to convey. Writing must be for expressing a purpose, and not to the end of stringing words together and uttering banal formalities. Rashid Pasha and the Persian minister called on Abdu'l-Baha again, and he spoke to them at length about his travels in America. Some evenings his meal consisted only of a cup of milk and a piece of bread. He described it as a healthy meal, and recalled that Baha'u'llah had said that during his sojourn in Soleimaniye, his food was just milk most of the time, and sometimes milk and rice cooked together. One day, he came across an excellent brand of China tea in a shop, bought some, brewed it himself in the hotel, and poured out cups for his attendants. Despite his preoccupations, which never left him free, and the indifferent state of his health, his sense of humor was always showing itself in diverse ways. One morning he called to his attendants to be good and behave themselves, to bring in the samovar and lay the tea things on the table. Tea beside the samovar is particularly delicious, he said. On one occasion he spoke with great feeling of the services rendered by Mirza Hassan, the king of the martyrs, his brother Mirza Hussein, the beloved of the martyrs, and Mirza Fath Ali Ardestani, to whom Baha'u'llah gave the surname Fath Azam, greatest victory. Baha'u'llah had said that on his journey from Baghdad to Constantinople, Fath Azam had been with him in spirit. Abdu'l-Baha also spoke on that occasion of how Mullah Hussein Bushrui, the Bab, gate to the gate, the first believer in the Bab, had come to realize the superior qualities of Mullah Muhammad Ali Barfarushi, the Qudus, just by sitting and listening to him one evening in Mazandaran, and of how amazed the Babis were the next morning to see Mullah Hussein, their leader and guide, standing in humble devotion in the presence of Qudus. A Baha'i came to Abdu'l-Baha to speak on behalf of a young Persian who was trying to attach himself to the faith. Abdu'l-Baha explained that should anyone commit 100 wrongs against his own person, he would overlook them all and treat the offender with kindness. Should anyone act treasonably towards his own person, he would act towards the offender as if he were someone most trusted. But he, Abdu'l-Baha, could never countenance nor aid any deed which would injure the faith. To murder him, Abdu'l-Baha said, would be preferable to defrauding others. Murdering him would not harm the faith. Defrauding people would. Another Persian came to ask for financial help. Abdu'l-Baha gave him the money, but advised him not to be a wastrel. He himself had to bear certain expenses for the sole purpose of maintaining the dignity of the faith. Some of the Iranian notables invited Abdu'l-Baha to take an automobile ride one afternoon. They went to the famous race course at Longchamps. But Abdu'l-Baha returned soon. He preferred walking to riding, and went out for a long walk with Dr. Muhammad Khan, one of the Iranian Baha'is then in Paris. That night, May 18th, he sat up with Monsieur and Madame Richard until midnight, talking about mysticism and Sufi tenets and practices in answer to their questions. Abdu'l-Baha visited an eminent member of the Persian aristocracy on May 22nd. The nobleman was overwhelmed and bowed to kiss his hands. He described to Abdu'l-Baha an occasion in London, where he had found himself seated near a lady who wore a simple, inexpensive ring set with cornelian. His curiosity had led him to ask why to be told, "You are a Persian and should know that the name of Baha'u'llah is inscribed on this ringstone." Feeling both shame at his ignorance and elation at this evidence of Persia's influence in high circles in London, he realized that his hostility to the faith of Baha'u'llah had vanished then and there. Later, Abdu'l-Baha visited Madame Jackson, who was ill and confined to her home, and that evening he received Albert Dawson, editor of the Christian Commonwealth. On May 23rd, Baha'is came with bouquets of flowers throughout the day, as it was the anniversary of the birth of Abdu'l-Baha. But he told them that the day should be considered and celebrated only as the anniversary of the declaration of the Bab. That was why it was a blessed day. It was incidental that he had been born on the same date. The feast was celebrated in the evening at the home of Laura and Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney. Abdu'l-Baha moved on the 27th to the hotel in Rue Lauriston, where he had stayed before. He was very tired and needed a few days' rest before people learned where he resided. Ahmad Pasha and the Dreyfus Barneys, who knew that hotel meals did not suit Abdu'l-Baha, had food specially cooked for him in their homes, but he asked them not to do so. May 30th witnessed a noteworthy gathering at the home of the Dreyfus Barneys, when diverse nationalities were represented. Consul Schwartz had come from Germany and spoke at the meeting. In his talk, Abdu'l-Baha underlined the true import of that harmonious and loving association of people of so many origins brought about by the power of Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Baha's historic visit to the Western world was now approaching its end. Mirza Ali Akbar Nakhjavani arrived back from the Holy Land on June 15th with the news of a considerable number of pilgrims awaiting Abdu'l-Baha's return. A Persian who had not hitherto visited Abdu'l-Baha called on June 2nd and was amazed to find so many of his prominent compatriots there. No better proof of the powers of Abdu'l-Baha was needed, he said. Many of these notable men had once been bitter opponents of the faith of Baha'u'llah, assailing it and its followers wherever and whenever they could, and now in the French capital they were rendering homage to the head of that faith. In the evening of June 6, Ahmad Izzat Pasha, who had been the right-hand man of Sultan Abdul-Hamid, fleeing Turkey when his master's fall was imminent, gave a dinner party for Abdu'l-Baha. 2 days later, a Persian prince, who was both young and haughty, called at Abdu'l-Baha's hotel. Soon after him, Ahmad Izzat Pasha arrived. Izzat's attitude of reverence taught the young prince a lesson which he took to heart. On June 12th at 8 a.m., Abdu'l-Baha left his hotel for the station. There he spoke with the Baha'is who had come to say farewell, urging them to be united at all times. At noon his train left for Marseille. When it reached 12 hours later, he stayed the night at a hotel next to the station and boarded the P&O steamer, Himalaya, at 9 a.m. the next morning. Abdu'l-Baha's historic tour of the West was over. His retinue now consisted of Sayyid Asadullah Qumi, Mirza Ali Akbar Nakhjavani, Mirza Mahmud Zarqani, and Mirza Ahmad Sohrab. An Indian passenger, a resident of Allahabad, had his cabin next to Abdu'l-Baha's. He and a number of other Indians spent some hours in his presence. A British consular official and his daughter also sought to meet him, and presented him with an English magazine which carried his photograph, and an account of his visit to the mosque at Woking. In the afternoon of June 17, 1913, Abdu'l-Baha landed at Port Said.